Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, April 24th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The Senate passes the $95 billion foreign military aid bill. So on Tuesday night, the Senate passed a $95 billion spending bill that includes military aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan in a vote of 79 to 18. So very strong bipartisan support for this monstrosity. And the bill has already passed through the House and now heads to Biden's desk, where he's very happy and excited about this, so he's going to sign it off right away. Earlier in the day, the Senate rejected an effort by some senators to add amendments to the legislation. That failed in a vote of 48 to 50. Some of the amendments were very bad. Some of them were trying to limit and restrict things, but either way, they didn't get a chance to try to tack them on. And this legislation also includes TikTok ban and the power to sell off frozen Russian assets to give to Ukraine, so the power to steal Russian assets. So it's four separate bills that were passed through the House that were rolled into this big thing. And as far as I understand, the TikTok ban, ByteDance, which is the company that owns it, which is based in China, will have about a year to divest from TikTok. If they don't divest, it'll get banned. And this is the kind of overreach we're going to see. I think this is just a taste of what, this new Cold War with China, the type of overreach and things that they're going to use in the name of, countering China. China's the big boogeyman that they can point to justify all sorts of things. So just to run through the stuff that it includes, I know I've been talking about this a lot lately, but it includes $61 billion for the proxy war in Ukraine, and a lot of that, most of the military aid is to replenish U.S. military stockpiles. So that means it's going to contracts for Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all these companies that are cashing in big on this proxy war. And you have the $9 billion in economic aid that's going to be in the form of loans, but the Ukraine's not actually expected to pay it back. They're either going to pay them back with the Russian assets, or apparently, according to CNN, the administration has the ability to cancel the debt anyway. So it doesn't really matter. And that was an idea, Trump and seemed to endorse, and Johnson said, that's where he got the idea from, basically, was the loans. So the bill also includes $26 billion to support Israel. About $9 billion of that will go toward humanitarian aid to Gaza and other places, while the remaining $17 billion will go toward military aid to support the slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza, and it will replenish, there's some money to replenish the Israeli air defenses as well. So another $8 billion will go toward military aid for Taiwan and other spending in the Indo-Pacific region to prepare for a future war with China. It includes $1.9 billion to replenish weapons sent to Taiwan and regional countries, and $2 billion in foreign military financing. And over $3.3 billion will go towards submarine infrastructure in the region. So the massive spending on foreign military aid, this was put forward by House Speaker Mike Johnson. He initially killed a deal last year that was, I think it was a $118 billion bill that included basically the same spending for the military aid, but also included billions for border spending and big changes to migrant policies. So he rejected that, but then eventually ended up giving the Democrats everything that they wanted. Anyway, so Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, he was very happy with this bipartisan cooperation. He said on the floor of the Senate, quote, "Today's outcome yet confirms another thing we've stressed from the beginning of this Congress. In divided government, the only way to ever get things done is bipartisanship. I thank Leader McConnell, as I've mentioned before, working hand in hand with us, not letting partisanship get in the way. I thank Speaker Johnson, who rose to the occasion, in his own words, that he had to do the right thing despite the enormous political pressure on him," end quote. And then I saw on Monday, Trump actually defended Johnson's actions and the lack of any sort of border deal as part of this. And, his reasoning was he pointed to the slim majority that Republicans have in the House. So this is basically Chuck Schumer's happy, Trump's happy, Biden's happy. It's a big bipartisan effort. So Trump said on Monday, quote, "Remember, the speakership we're talking about has a majority by one vote, and you can't really get too tough when, look, we all want to be tough guys and all, and I have a lot of friends, and frankly, I have a lot of friends on both sides. If you look at the vote, a lot of Republicans, a lot of good Republicans voted for it, but Mike is in there and he's trying. And some people were disappointed, and a lot of people were very disappointed that nothing happened with the border. I'll straighten the border out," end quote. So Trump defending Johnson after he put through this horrible spending bill. And they got the Ukraine aid. I think, they got it all ready to ship once Biden puts his signature on this thing. A nice big weapons package is getting shipped straight to Ukraine. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. tells Iraq to ensure the safety of U.S. troops. So on Tuesday, the Pentagon said that the Iraqi government must ensure the safety of U.S. troops and appeared to threaten airstrikes if there are more attacks on U.S. bases in the region. So the warning came after U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria came under drone and rocket attacks for the first time since early February. So this is Pentagon spokesman Pat Ryder. He said, quote, "These are the first attacks on coalition facilities since February 4th. These attacks put coalition and Iraqi personnel at risk. We call on the government of Iraq to take all necessary steps to ensure the safety of U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria against attacks from these groups. If these attacks continue, we will not hesitate to defend our forces as we have done in the past," end quote. So that sounds like he's threatening airstrikes. Between October 2023 and early February, U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria came under hundreds of attacks, and they started in response to what was happening in Gaza and U.S. support for it. And the U.S. launched several rounds of airstrikes in response, killing several members of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF, which is a group of mostly Shia militias, but it is part of Iraq's security forces. So they're part of the government forces that the U.S. backs and is supposedly the U.S.'s partner in Iraq. And we're bombing them. I mean, it's just such a mess. Any reasonable person would say, why don't we just get out of there? But of course, that's not what's happening. And I think these new attacks could be the fact that there has been no concrete progress toward a U.S. withdrawal. You had the Prime Minister, al-Sudani, saying that the U.S. has got to go, but he just visited Washington and met with Biden last week, and he came home and there was no sign that they actually that anything like that is going to happen anytime soon. So we'll see if the attacks continue or not. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills 2 significant Hezbollah members in South Lebanon. So this article is from Jason Ditz. Israel has reported it has killed 2 members of Hezbollah, whom they labeled significant terrorists, during overnight and morning attacks in southern Lebanon. The more noteworthy man was identified as Mohammed Khalil Atiyah, a senior member of the Radwan force who was killed overnight in attacks on buildings in Lebanon. And then Hezbollah said that they fired back, and they apparently fired some drones pretty far deep. They're being reported as Hezbollah's deepest strike into Israeli territory so far. All right, so the next one here, the Red Cross says that Rafah evacuation is not possible. So a Red Cross official said Tuesday that an evacuation of civilians from Rafah was not possible under the current conditions due to the sheer destruction in Gaza as Israel is preparing to invade the city. So this is Fabrizio Carboni. He's a Middle East director for the Red Cross. He said, quote, "When we see the level of destruction in the middle area of Gaza and in the north, it's not clear to us where people will be moved to, where they can have decent shelter and essential services. So today, with the information we have and from where we stand, we don't see this massive evacuation as possible," end quote. And he also said that the probability for a major Israeli operation in Rafah is increasing, and his warning aligns with a report from Israel's Khan broadcaster, which reported on Tuesday that the Israeli military will launch the big attack on Rafah very soon. So in another sign that an invasion could be coming soon, Al Jazeera reported that satellite images show Israel is preparing for an escalation as it deployed a large number of troops and armored vehicles near Gaza. The report said it was something like 800 armored vehicles are stationed, or military vehicles are stationed at near Gaza, and 700 of them are in the Negev desert in the south, which would be near where would they would need to be if they're going to go for Rafah. So, of course, the U.S. is claiming it is against Israel invading Rafah without a clear plan to protect civilians, but it's not putting any real pressure on Israel since it continues to provide military aid and political support. So in the meantime, Israel really intensified strikes across the entire Gaza Strip on Tuesday, and they ordered a new evacuation in the north. So it looks like they're preparing for an escalation in the north as well. So no sign anything is cooling down here. And Israel also has stepped up bombing Rafah over the weekend. 22 people were killed, including 18 children. All right, so the next one here, in numbers, 200 days of Israel's war on Gaza. So this is from Al Jazeera. And it's just so it's been 200 days. Tuesday marked 200 days since October 7th. And I just thought this was helpful for people because it has the numbers of people killed and everything. So according to Gaza's health ministry, at least 34,183 people have been killed and 77,084 have been wounded in Israeli attacks. And about 72% of those killed are women and children, according to an update by Gaza's government media office on Tuesday. On Monday, UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk said a child in Gaza is killed or wounded every 10 minutes. And 7,000 people are missing, according to the government media office, many presumed dead under the rubble. Let's see what other numbers are in here. 62% of homes have been destroyed. At least 75,000 tons of explosives have been dropped on Gaza by Israeli forces. Nearly 90,000 housing units have been destroyed, while nearly 300,000 units have been damaged by the Israeli air and ground offensive. So really, 62% of all houses. And I know in Gaza City, I think it's something like 84% in northern Gaza. And then the hunger situation, 1.1 million people are facing catastrophic lack of food. And again, the unfortunate thing here is that there's no end to this in sight. I haven't seen any sort of progress with the negotiations or anything to indicate that Biden is considering changing. It seems like there's less attention on this right now. With all the drama in Congress, with what happened with Iran, it just seems like the scrutiny hasn't been as much as it was, when Israel killed those aid workers. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine cuts services on military-aged men abroad. So Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba announced on Tuesday that Ukraine would be cutting off consular services for military-aged men living abroad as a way to pressure them to return home and fight. So this is part of the conscription. They're trying to get these Ukrainian men who are not in Ukraine, who are in Europe or elsewhere, to come back and fight, to be thrown into the meat grinder. So Kuleba wrote on X, quote, "How it looks like now a man of conscription age went abroad, showed his state that he does not care about its survival, and then comes and wants to receive services from this state. It does not work this way. Our country is at war," end quote. So Ukraine's new mobilization law requires all Ukrainian men ages 18 to 60 to update their personal information with the military registration office. And if Ukrainians living abroad do not comply, they must be cut off from consular services. So Kuleba said, quote, "The obligation to update one's documents with the conscription centers existed even before the new law on mobilization was passed," end quote. And he added that Ukraine's foreign ministry will soon provide further clarification on the procedure for these Ukrainians living in other countries to, fill in, meet their obligation and get their consular services. So according to Reuters, there are roughly 860,000 adult Ukrainian men living outside of Ukraine in Europe. Some of them were able to leave despite martial law prohibiting men ages 18 to 60 from leaving the country. Others lived outside of Ukraine before Russia launched its invasion in February 2022. So Ukraine's manpower shortage, this is one of its most significant problems it's facing. We've seen Ukrainian officials say the U.S. and NATO can send as many weapons as they want. If they give us everything we ask for, we don't have the men to use them. So it's not clear if Ukraine's going to be able to fill the ranks. I don't know if they have a real way of pressuring these Ukrainian military-age men who don't want to go back and fight, if they have a real way of pressuring them. I doubt we'll see EU countries start deporting Ukrainians to go fight, but, I wouldn't put it past them. So you have Ukraine facing these manpower shortages, and then on the other hand, Russia's military is now 15% bigger than it was in February 2022. So a pretty big difference between the situation for the Ukrainian military and the Russian military. And this is the result of the U.S. passing this $61 billion. It's going to purchase, it's going to continue the war, and it's going to lead to more Ukrainians dying, more conscription and things like that. And just to prolong it, even though there's no chance of Ukrainian victory in sight, they just want to keep it going. I think that's all they want to do in the U.S. Keep the money flowing. That's what Zelensky and his cronies want to do is keep this thing going. And it looks like they're going to get what they want. All right. So the next one here, Ukraine has killed 120 civilians in Belgorod since 2022. So the governor of Russia's Belgorod Oblast said Tuesday that Ukrainian attacks on the Russian border region have killed 120 civilians and wounded 651 people since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. So Belgorod has come under a lot of drone and artillery attacks throughout the war. And there's also been the militias fighting for Kiev that have launched these cross-border raids into Belgorod. And that includes the neo-Nazi Russian Volunteer Corps, which is supposedly made up of Russians. I know the guy who leads it was born in Russia. And these are openly people who are openly neo-Nazi, and they're armed with American weapons. I mean, it's one of those things. We always try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. But could you imagine Russia supporting some sort of neo-Nazi militia attacking the U.S. with Russian weapons from Canada? Like, we just can't even imagine, but it's happening anyway. So according to Governor Gladkov, he said 11 children were among the dead and 51 children had been injured in Belgorod. And just for context of the overall civilian deaths, according to the latest UN estimate, which they gave in November 2023, they estimated that over 10,000 civilians had been killed in Ukraine since Russia invaded. And that includes more than 560 children. So, I mean, you put that in perspective with Gaza, 560 children in Ukraine, which of course is horrific. Any single child being killed in war is horrific. But you look at that, and in Gaza in 6 months, over 14,000 children have been killed. So Gladkov warned residents to be on high alert as they celebrate Orthodox Easter, which will take place on May 5th. He said, quote, "The situation is extremely difficult. The attacks continue. People continue to die," end quote. So Russia has reported the use of U.S. and other Western weapons in attacks on Belgorod, which Moscow has said is an example of how NATO is directly involved in the war. And the Russian Volunteer Corps is armed with NATO weaponry, including U.S.-provided armored vehicles. So neo-Nazi militia rolling into Russia with American armored vehicles. And of course, these Ukrainian attacks always risk big escalation. All right, so the next one here, the UK to send a record $620 million military aid package to Ukraine. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. The UK is trying to get in on the action here. They announced the UK announced its largest ever military aid package for Ukraine, totaling more than $620 million or 500 pounds. Washington is Kiev's prominent backer, however. Kyle's just kind of comparing what the UK has given them compared to what the US has provided. The UK, despite being one of the most kind of belligerent NATO countries in this thing, they have troops in Ukraine helping fire missiles and things like that. They relatively have very small military, and we've seen British military officials say that they're basically out of weapons to send Ukraine. But here, I guess they found some more. So according to the UK delegation to NATO, the arms will include 1,600 strike and air defense missiles, Storm Shadow missiles, 4 million rounds of ammo, 60 boats, and over 400 vehicles. Defense Minister Grant Shapps said the aid will help Ukraine win the war. He said, quote, "This record package of military aid will give President Zelensky and his brave nation more of the kit they need to kick Putin out and restore peace and stability in Europe," end quote. And he bragged about the things that the UK has provided them. So if you remember, I think it was yesterday, I was talking about this coming American military aid package. The U.S. is preparing a very big weapons package. And I said, I know that I thought the biggest ones that they might have sent were over $1 billion, but Kyle showed me that there's actually a few stories that I wrote, I didn't remember them for some reason, that the U.S. actually announced single weapons packages. And when I say weapons packages, it's when they announce we're sending X amount of weapons to Ukraine or we're buying these weapons for Ukraine. And there was at least 2 that were over or just below $3 billion. So maybe we'll see something like that. So in the UK has provided $3.7 billion in total military assistance to Ukraine, and they had the U.S. announce at least 2 arms packages worth $3 billion. So it just goes to show the U.S. is spending way more money on this than the U.K. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. to convert Pacific oil rigs into military bases. So this is kind of a crazy story. And I saw this was reported by the Defense Post and a few other outlets, but it said that the U.S. Navy will convert surplus oil rigs in the Western Pacific into mobile military bases as part of the U.S. military buildup aimed at China. So the naval engineering firm Gibbs & Cox, they developed this concept known as the Mobile Defense Depot Platform, or MODEP, and they presented it earlier this month at the Sea, Air, Space Expo, and the idea is to convert oil rigs into mobile missile defense and resupply bases. So Dave Zook, who is an architect at Gibbs & Cox, told Naval News, quote, "Our target here is to find a solution to help the challenging problem of having capacity issues in the Western Pacific for not enough cells, not enough missiles, not enough of being able to keep those ships in the forward station," end quote. So again, they want to make missile defense platforms and resupply, I guess, bases that the Navy could just go to resupply. And they're saying that these floating bases would be able to hold 512 vertical launch system cells or 100 large missile launchers, which is 5 times the capacity of a U.S. Navy destroyer. The idea is to counter China's ballistic missiles that could take out U.S. warships and bases in the region in the event of an all-out war. So, I mean, this is really nuts. I mean, you think about using oil rigs, it just feels like it opens up that type of infrastructure as a target in a war. If they're not sure which oil rigs have the missiles, they'll just hit all the oil rigs or something like that. U.S. military officials have been explicit about the fact that this military buildup in the Western Pacific, in Asia, is to prepare for a direct war with China, and that they're expanding their military footprint in the Philippines and in Pacific Island nations for the purpose of giving China more targets that it will have to hit they've said this explicitly, so that's what I guess is the thinking here. Why not oil rigs? We can move them around. And they say that it's a lot cheaper to do this than to build like a new missile defense base on land. So we'll see if they go through with this plan. I mean, this is something I know that they've discussed for a while. Apparently the Navy's into it this time. All right, so the next one here, China says that the U.S. is stubbornly trying to contain China. So Antony Blinken is visiting China very soon. And before the trip, China had a few things to say. This article is from the South China Morning Post. It says Beijing accused Washington of stubbornly pushing to contain China and hit out over the South China Sea and trade a day before Secretary of State Antony Blinken is due to arrive in the country. So in a briefing on Tuesday, a foreign ministry official said that the U.S. had taken measures to suppress China's economy and trade, which had seriously harmed China's interests. And, that's referring to the sanctions and all this stuff. This official said, quote, "The United States is stubbornly advancing its strategy to contain China and continue to adopt wrong words and deeds and interfere in China's internal affairs, smears China's image and harms China's interests," end quote. And sounds like they're talking about rhetoric over Taiwan and the South China Sea as well. So we'll see how Blinken's visit goes if he accomplishes anything. He's not the best diplomat, so I doubt he'll really do much. But anyway, the next one here, the last story, Chad. The African nation of Chad signals that it wants U.S. troops to leave. So Chad is threatening to scrap an agreement with the U.S. that allows American troops to operate in the country, signaling that the U.S. might lose even more of its military footprint in Africa after Niger ordered a U.S. withdrawal. So Chad's government sent a letter to the U.S. earlier this month that said it could end the status of forces agreement. The letter did not directly order the U.S. military to leave, but U.S. officials told CNN that if the agreement were canceled, U.S. forces would have to leave a French military base where they are stationed. And the U.S. military presence in Chad is small. CNN said it was less than 100 troops that are there. But this still just follows this pattern of the U.S. losing its, access to African countries, and really the pattern of France, these Western countries in general, getting kicked out of the region. So the Chad also, they ordered the U.S. to halt activity at this base, saying that the U.S. had failed to provide documents justifying their presence there. So in recent years, so apparently these U.S. troops operate at a French military base. And in recent years, we've seen France get kicked out of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger now. France still maintains a presence in Chad, but there are growing calls for French forces to leave. So U.S. officials told CNN that the letter could be a negotiating tactic to get a more favorable deal. But again, the expulsion of U.S. forces would follow a pattern, and Chad does neighbor Niger. The Pentagon has reaffirmed that the U.S. agreed to withdraw from Niger after initially ignoring the order to leave. So Pentagon spokesman said on Monday, quote, "We can confirm the beginning of discussions between the U.S. and Niger for the orderly withdrawal of U.S. forces from the country." So we'll see. It seems like they're still kind of trying to drag their feet because they have that big drone base that they don't want to give up. But I think it seems like they don't really have another option. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Bob Dreyfus, handling and mishandling the Iran nuclear program. One from David Stockman, the Uniparty's Day of Infamy. One from Roger D. Harris, the North American peace movement at an inflection point. And one from Ted Snyder, is Putin bent on conquering Europe? And one from Colonel Douglas McGregor, is it game, set, match to Moscow? Before I almost forgot to mention that it's our fundraiser at antiwar.com, which we started this week. This is how we get by. We are reliant on our readers and now our listeners to this show. If you appreciate my work and what we do at antiwar.com, please help us out. You go to antiwar.com/donate and you see the different ways you can support us. And we're trying to raise $100,000 for this fundraiser. Usually we've done $80,000 in the past, but costs have gone up. We've been paying people to write a lot more on the weekend with everything that's been going on. And We also just haven't done a fundraiser in a while. So please help us out. If you like this show, again, this is how it's done. Without antiwar.com, this show would not exist. So that is it for me for today. If you can't donate, you could also just help us out by sharing the show, commenting, liking, subscribing, leaving reviews, telling your friends about us. That stuff all really helps out as well. Follow us on Instagram, on X. And yeah, that's it. I will be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.